I'm so excited to be here today with the Kansas City Civil Rights Division. I'm going to be talking about the new face of protest and talking about the need for us to understand that though we've gained many progresses and many stances in civil rights, that we also still have challenges that are remaining. And that though we are halfway through the second term of an African American president, now is the time for us to rest. It is a time for us to immerse into action. That if we look at the issues that are confronting us, the erosion of the Voting Rights Act, the erosions of the Civil Rights Act, police brutality on the rise, issues that are facing us in the housing area, this is a time for us to begin to engage in both civil direct action and changing the laws and making certain that the laws that are on the books are implemented justly and rightly toward individuals of Black, brown, and diverse descents. And so today I'm going to challenge the crowd to understand and to determine whether or not they are part of making certain that individuals' liberties are protected. Sometimes we believe in this country that there's not a need for us to advance civil rights. We believe that we have accomplished the things that we need to accomplish, and the only thing that we need to do is to implement what is on the books. But in the age of the Voting Rights Act, when we look at the many states that are requiring individuals to present IDs, and people say, you know, that's just a minor little issue. But when we look at the complexity of that issue, the fact that there are many individuals that go to jail for really minor crimes, and there's an issue of mass incarceration, those individuals, they come out of jail, they are unable to get a job because they have a record. When you're unable to get a job, you're unable to get a home. And when you're unable to get a home, you're unable to get an ID. If you're unable to get an ID in a state that requires you to have an ID, that means you're unable to vote. So we need a nation to rise up and say, Congress, now is time to change the standard that says that a law enforcement officer has the ability to elevate force to that degree that he or she believes is reasonable in order to stop the force or the danger that they perceive. In law, we call that subjective, arbitrary, and capricious. We're saying to Congress that the Supreme Court set that standard in Tennessee versus Gardner, and now in 2015, it is time for you to change it. Because as a country, we've never really dealt with the elephant that sits in the room, and that's the issue of racism. Because we've never dealt with that, what we see happen in a law that is so subjective, police officers begin to use their discretion on where they will elevate cases. And what we see is a different application of force in the Black community as opposed to white community. When a white man in South Carolina can walk into a Walmart, terrorize the Walmart store, try to steal a cash register, lead the police on a high-speed chase, try to grab a police officer's gun 3 times, and he only gets tased. But a Black man in Ohio actually is standing in a store, leaning on a toy gun, talking to his girlfriend on the phone, and he gets shot down. That tells you there's a different form of policing in our community than other communities. And we're saying today that now is the time for us to understand that the new civil rights is the issues that we see in education. You know, the system has utilized the educational system to further divide. And if we look at the gerrymandering that happens in the housing patterns, we see that we lock in brown and Black communities into school districts that don't receive enough resources. We have to stand up as a nation and say, it is time to ensure that we have quality of education for all of our children, because failure to educate one child is a failure to educate this nation. And the more that we allow the school to prison, the pipeline to go on, what I find educators saying to me is, Pamela, if we were honest with ourselves, mass incarceration and police brutality is a self-fulfilling prophecy of the school to prison pipeline. When we choose to push our students out of the door instead of educating them, we are sending a signal to a whole community that they're not valued. And so we have some urgency between us. We have some challenges in education, some challenging still remaining in housing, some challenging remaining in our civil liberties, in voting. And as a community, as a nation, if we don't pay attention and we don't rise up against these things, we will find ourselves having to employ the same measures that Martin Luther King, John Lewis, and others had to employ as they walked across the Pettus Bridge, or as they went down to Alabama and they had forced Bull Connor or allowed Bull Connor to sick those dogs on them. We will be at a place where we expose America's injustice to a nation, and we don't want to get to that point. We want America to listen, and so it takes us, not just educators, not just professionals, but the movement always starts from the grass. It's the grassroots that really shakes a nation and makes even organized civil organizations say, such as the National Bar Association, such as the Urban League, such as NAACP, that action has to happen now. Not tomorrow, but now. We've waited long enough. I know that people know that the saying Martin Luther King said that he coined, that we can find even true today: injustice anywhere is a threat against justice everywhere. But the real question that we should be asking ourselves is whether or not the check that America presented in the 60s as a part of the civil rights movement, whether they're still paying on that check, or whether they have again issued a stop payment and we're getting the remnants of what is conceived to be justice, but we're not really getting the full breadth of what justice is. And so today, I come to urge us to say we do have an emergency going on, not just in police brutality, but in the fight for civil rights. Civil rights is not something that's said. Many people say, should we stop this movement? Shouldn't we stop? Haven't we arrived? You've elected an African-American president. You have African-American people in Congress. You have Hispanics and Asians and different races, diverse people who are all throughout our legal system, throughout our legislative system. But what we really have to ask ourselves is whether the application of a law is the same, not whether the law is on the book, but whether the application applies the same in those black and brown and diverse communities as it does in the white community. One of the things people use as a rationale for police brutality is that black on black crime is so high. But the reports that they do not give is that in numbers released by the FBI in 2011 said that black on black crime is on a decline, that it dropped from 92% to 90%, and that white on white crime is on a rise. But we don't see police ravishing those neighborhoods at the same rate. When we look at the statistics that come out of municipalities that talk about traffic stops and who you find contraband on, you find that you find it more on whites than you do on black and brown people, but yet we don't see white people being pulled over at the same rate, beaten at the same rate, shot at the same rate. That tells you in this country we have a problem, and civil rights and the advocacy for it has not ended. It is only in the process of us continuing to go on. And if we fail this generation, young people will continue to rise up and do what we won't do. They will say, if you won't protect us, we will protect ourselves. So the new face of protest has to be the young protesters, the seasoned leaders, and the middle-aged protesters, remembering what it took to get here, but keeping in mind we have not arrived and achieved our ultimate goal. You know, I believe the way that we get individuals interested in engaging in this civil rights movement is to continue to expose injustice. People have a real hard time fighting against what they see in front of their faces. If you can remember, in the 60s, people were not interested in the civil rights movement. They dismissed Martin Luther King, but when they started to see whites spit on each other, spit on blacks in counters, kill individuals, sick dogs on people. There is something that rises up in America and say that injustice is just not right. The other thing is holding people to task. We cannot allow civil rights organizations who are not doing what they were designed to do to think that it's okay. We cannot allow city council members who will not pass laws to protect us to remain in their seats. We have to say that there are parts of this puzzle that deal with voting, that deal with economic boycott, that everybody has a piece in the puzzle. And we have to make people believe that there are consequences to your failures, not to stand up for that what is right. What happens today is we talk a lot about what we should do, but do we really ever issue a pink slip to a legislator who fails to implement a law? Do we ever implement a pink slip to an individual who's running a civil rights organization? Do we ever stop our funding from them to an organization who is not doing what it should do? That is how you get people's attention, to connect the dots. The way you make them connect the dots is to make them feel and understand that this is a real issue for you. When you pull away your support from someone, they will begin to pay attention to you. To young people, I would say, who don't care, look at your leaders who are young in Ferguson, in Oakland, California, in Baltimore. It was not mainstream that made police brutality an issue. It was the young people. And the reason why this is your issue is because those who are being targeted, who are being killed by the police, are young people. And you should care because the generation sits in your hand. And I have to say to you that you don't have to do it and fight it the way it was fought 60 years ago. I don't share the opinion of others who say that what young people are doing is full of chaos. I say I applaud them for, within the law, standing up and advocating for their rights. Take a look at what they're doing and join on board of that. And the reason why it's important to you is because you have to understand that tomorrow you won't be the young, you will be the middle age. And if you don't solve the problem today, the people that follow you will not be able to enjoy life the way you're enjoying life. So I would challenge us to make sure that we are in relationship with young people, to teach them and to employ upon them how important this journey is. We have to gain credibility with them, because for some of them, we have lost credibility. They look at us as individuals who only want to be seen in the spotlight, as individuals who only want to be in the media, and that's not true. But we have to not discount them, because at one point we were young and we were telling the civil rights leaders of the past, step aside, pass the torch to us. And we got to remember how we felt when we were ready to lead and nobody would listen to us. We went out and started our own organizations because other people would not hear the clarion call that we were trying to march. The same is true with young people. They are not our enemies. They are our future. And we owe it to them to educate them, to stand with them, and to be in relationship with them. And the more you build relationship with a person, the more you build trust with them. And the more you build trust with them, the more you will get them to see that we're in this together. I teach my young people in Ferguson that laws are not the end and be all to a movement. It is a sliver of the movement, and there are other factions of the movement. What you need to do is get the experts together of all those pieces of the movement so that we can make sure that we're attacking it. Economics absolutely has a role and a place in both the advancement of civil rights, but also the reason why we're in the condition that we're in now. When we look at economic empowerment, most of what we fight against is economic injustice. When you look at the Justice Department report that came out about Ferguson, the one thing that the National Bar Association said is you can equate the fact that the police department was really using black people as a cash machine. The reason why they were pulling over African Americans and individuals at the rate they were is because a part of their budget was based on and existed off of them making money off of traffic stops. And so petty crimes and petty ticket was the #3 item in their budget. So in order for them to make their budget, they had to have a certain level of traffic stops that happen. That's pure economics. We sometimes in diverse communities don't look at and study economics in the manner that we should, but we should, because failure to have somebody have a job ends up failure for somebody to have a home. Failure for somebody to have a home means failure for you to have an opportunity in life to be a productive citizen in life. That's not an excuse for people to commit crime. It's not an excuse for people to rob folks. It's not. But if we don't deal with the core of what's going on with economics, we won't be able to solve some of the problems that we're having. But economic boycott cannot be sporadic. We can't say we're going to boycott a store and do it for a weekend and think that's going to cause an effect for it to happen. It must be systematic, strategic, and it must have an end goal, and it must make sense to what you're doing. On the local level, we are asking for there to be stricter mental health testing when it comes to law enforcement, mandatory de-escalation of force training, and mandatory race-based training. The purpose of these training and these procedures is not just to train and to re-educate people, but it's to weed out those individuals who shouldn't be on the force at all. On a state level, we're asking for independent investigation, independent prosecution of all police-involved cases. Send those cases to the state's attorney's office, have an investigative unit in that department, and have them investigate it and determine whether or not a case should be brought. On a federal level, we're asking for there to be a change in and definition added to what it means to escalate force as opposed to de-escalate force. Make it a felony for another police officer to watch police brutality happen and do nothing about it. Third, if you're gonna pass a camera bill, put some penalties to it that would penalize a police officer for tampering with that camera. We believe that if you do those things and you change the federal standard in Garner, Tennessee versus Garner, we will be further along to eradicating police brutality in this country. The National Bar Association in July of last year, wrote laws that we believe should be passed on both the state level, the local level, and the federal level. And we believe that if these laws are implemented, America can eradicate some of the police brutality that is going on. A lot of people focus on everything else but the law, but if you don't change that standard by which you measure the facts, we're going to continue to see officers be held, their killings to be held justifiable, and that's something that we don't want. So I implore you to go to www.nationalbar.org, take a look at the laws that we've written on the local level, the state level, and the federal level, asking for accountability when it comes to police. Thank you.